Welcome to Barry's In the Interim podcast, where we explore the cutting edge of innovative clinical trial design for the pharmaceutical and medical industries, and so much more. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome to Barry's In the Interim podcast. This is episode number 1, the very first inaugural episode of the podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you guys. I have with me Dr. Don Barry and Dr. Scott Barry, statisticians, experts, thought leaders, and founders of Barry Consultants. And I want to get into all of that. But we are kicking off this show because this is the 25th anniversary coming up for Barry Consultants. And it is such a momentous occasion. And I'm so glad to have the founders and experts in this arena, because you guys really are the trendsetters in statistical trials, clinical trials, adaptive trials. I want to get into all of that. But we're celebrating this year with so many new projects and just a lot of excitement coming up in 2025. So this podcast is a part of that. And so as such, I would love to hear the story of Barry Consultants. And I have the best people to do that. And so I would love to hear and share with our audience and our network, how did Barry begin? What was the motivations behind the firm? Who impacted you in those early beginning stages? What kind of conversations do you have? What are the stories? What challenges did you encounter? And then toward the end of the show, I would love to hear what's next. Where are we going from here? And so, Don, you are the founder. You are the man of the hour. I would love to hear, what was it like when you started Barry? How did that come about, and why? Why are we here today?
So I was a graduate student at Yale University, and one of my professors was Frank Anscombe, a very famous statistician, and my wife was pregnant at the time, and Frank asked me, he said, "So how are you going to pay for this?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "I have no idea." And he said, "Well, when your wife is in the hospital and you get the bill, bring it to me." So I brought it to him, and he had a grant that paid for the hospital and everything. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. And I count that as Scott's very first grant, because Scott was the baby. And of course, you see him now, he's no longer a baby. But he still is thinking in very naive thoughts and very creative thoughts. And that's really the beginning of Barry Consultants. Just a word about the interim. In the interim between that and when we founded Barry, it wasn't a particular time that Barry came into being. It was, I was known as a radical, reactionary, crazy guy, loosey-goosey, some people called me, trying to change the way we looked at medical research. And so it was my touring around, Brandon, I used the term Joni Appleseed, around the country and pharmaceutical companies and whoever would listen, I would give them a talk and spur them on. Just an anecdote about that. Along the way, I was in Washington, D.C., on the metro, and coming back from one of my talks, and a guy came up to me. It turned out to be he was a statistician at the FDA, and he said, "Dr. Barry, I'm a fan of yours. Every time I hear you talk, I become a Bayesian for 5 minutes. Can you work on a sustained release version?" So I did. But when did Barry start? It started like 2001. Scott and I happened to be in Texas, and I had been doing consulting, and Scott, take it from here.
So 33 years after Frank Anscombe's grant with that. So I was on faculty at Texas A&M statistics and doing research, very much enjoying it, teaching. And a number of projects came through Don, who was at MD Anderson Cancer Center, building clinical trial designs. And so I was helping with those, and I loved them. Every one turned out to be a puzzle. I love board games, chess, bridge, Settlers of Catan, and they all have, what's the problem to solve? And all of these had a problem to solve. We were using all of the techniques, the statistics, the science to solve these. And every one I worked on, I loved. And so after 5 years, I wanted to do more of that. So we talked about what would this look like? Suppose we started a business to design better, smarter trials. And so in June of 2000, we decided I would leave academia and we would start Barry Consultants. I was the full-time person. Don was at MD Anderson Cancer Center. And so June 1st, 2000, we started Barry Consultants with really no idea what was going to happen, but we had shared interests, desires to design smarter, better clinical trials, and really enjoyed it. And so we started it, the two of us.
And how's that been for you?
Fabulous. Still going on 25 years and still very much enjoying every day of it.
I love that. Well, I'm curious, you starting your first, starting your company like this, and I know you had, clients that were needing your expertise, very complicated, sophisticated trials, big money involved in some of the pharmaceutical companies or medical devices, things like that. What were some of the challenges that you encountered early on, and how did that shape Barry now into who it's become?
Yeah, we've been part of what we're trying to do is through change. It's always changing the status quo when you're trying to do something different. And just to set this up, the standard of a clinical trial is the standard thing is let's enroll 200 patients, enroll the trial for 4 years, gather the data and look at the data after 4 years and see if we've answered the question. Invariably, you look at the data and you say, oh, shoot, I wish we'd have done something different. I wish we'd have changed the patients, changed the treatment, gone longer, gone shorter. We could have done a better trial, but the sort of not looking at the data for 4 years. So let's design smarter trials. We were doing something different. And early on, what was great is early on, Don's going around as Johnny Appleseed was saying, we need to do this different. And saying we need to do it different and publishing about doing it different. And now we were going to do it different. We were creating a company that was going to overcome all of the challenges, the regulatory challenges, the operational challenges, the people that say you can't do that, the people who don't do this as normal things. So anytime you're saying you're going to do it different, you have to sort of tear down all of those barriers. And we had a number of people who believed we were doing good things, believed this was better. So we had those, the people who saw it differently that were a huge part of thinking that what we were going to do was the right way to do it.
So the believers, yes. There were people that were on our side. People that were on our side didn't know they were on our side until we talked with them. And Brandon, you said that companies needed our expertise. They didn't know that. They had to be persuaded that there was something better. And some of them took first steps. I mentioned to you a stroke trial that I designed for Pfizer, and there was one very key person in the audience for a short course that I was giving. It was Mike Krams, who was an MD. This was in the United States, but he was based in Europe and England, in fact, if it's still part of Europe. And he asked me if I could design a trial for him. And I did. And just to talk about the various companies, he was working for Pfizer. After Pfizer ran the trial, they decided that it was a terrific thing, and the upper management decided it was a terrific trial that answered the question as efficiently as possible. It turned out to be a very negative question, which was good because it got rid of the drug, and it's no longer using resources that there are many, many drugs in the world that deserve them better. And the company, Pfizer, wanted to patent the algorithm that ran the trial. And the reason they wanted to do that is not necessarily they wanted to do additional trials like it, but they didn't want anybody else to be. They wanted to own it. Luckily for me, our contract said that I own it, not them. So they weren't able to patent it. And it's that kind of thing that we were really providing a service that they didn't know they needed. But we knew the world needed it because we were going to change the world. And it was that kind of dedication and almost a religion that we have the answer. And the point was to convince other people. And slowly but surely we've done it. So we now, I don't think Scott mentioned, but now we have like 35 people, mostly PhD statisticians, who are carrying the ball for us. And we're really, fast forward, changing the world because of some of the trials that we have designed and have been very successful.
So that was the Aston stroke trial, and that was actually pre-Barry. That was probably one of the things that helped get us started. And another interesting person involved in that was Tom Park. So Don had designed this amazing adaptive trial with many, many looks in the trial, 16 doses, and to implement that was brand new.
Daily randomization changes in the algorithm that was picking the doses. There were 15 positive doses.
So even today, that would be considered a very innovative trial design. And Tom Park was at Tesla at the time and helped us implement that. He's now at Barry, and he runs our software division and helps us overcome the barrier. So we've run into a number of people like this that have a huge impact in Barry.
Well, I want to pick up on a thread that you were talking about, Scott, that you're it's always about change and kind of disrupting the status quo, if I could call it that. And so you guys have touched on the different ways that you do trials and how that's come about. But I'm curious, both of you, how would you describe succinctly or briefly, or just in a short way, how would you describe the difference that Barry is compared to the traditional way to do either clinical trial designs or the way that you run your firm or their culture? Like if let's say I'm at Pfizer and I'm looking across the sea of, statisticians that I could interact with across a different, range of firms and different people that are doing that. And what is it that makes Barry so different?
It's a great question. I think traditionally there's not a ton of statisticians who have a huge impact on the trial design, really focusing on what's the question being asked. And so we dive in and thoroughly investigate that. and show through clinical trial simulation, which is one of the things we've sort of helped developed over 25 years, what the trial is going to do. It's almost like you use simulation to design an airplane, to design the most efficient cars. We now do it with clinical trials. We're able to show them what it looks like. Here's alternatives. You could shape this way. You could do it that way. And the wonderful thing about it is if you're trying to get somebody to do something different, you can't tell them, do it differently. We're named consultants, but if you go in and say, I think you should do this, it doesn't work. What they want to see is they want to see and compare, and you show them, if you do it this way, you get this. If you do it this way, you get this, or this way. And I want to do that. And I want to do that, and I want to do that. And they get to this place, and it was them. They're making the decisions. They're driving it. They're the agent of change. We help show them that. We don't tell them what to do. We show them the possible ways and the scenarios, and it allows them to be the biggest advocate for the direction they're going.
Very
So,
cool.
Brandon, somewhere in this conversation, we want to talk about the FDA because it has been essential for our existence, essential for what we do. Back in 2010, the FDA issued a guidance for adaptive design that said simulation for controlling type 1 error rate is little understood. And the Bayesian approach, which we take in statistics, is heavily dependent on that very thing, about simulating a trial. Simulating a trial, what we mean is we make an assumption about what the truth is. Is the drug good or not? And if it's good, how good is it? And we simulate a trial to show that regardless of what the truth is, we're going to find the truth. But we have complicated trials. The Aston trial is updating daily, the results coming in by fax in those days. And the simulations, when we do 100,000 of them, sort of guarantee that we've got the answer, that it's doing. It has a 5% error rate, but we demonstrate that from the simulations. And that was a big block for us, the fact that the FDA said they didn't understand it and they weren't convinced that it was the right thing to do or that it was giving you the correct answer. And so we were lucky. Another person to mention in this is at the FDA was Lissa Levange, who took over shortly after that guidance was issued, and it was head of the statistics group at CDER, the Center for Drugs, and she arranged for bringing in the statistical community over the next 10 years to help them understand. And in 2019, they issued another guidance for adaptive clinical trial design that said simulation is okay. And that was a really big thing for us because we have this software that Scott mentioned that Tom Parks is in charge of. It's a fax. It's called Fixed and Adaptive Clinical Trial Simulator. And it can be used to simulate any trial, not just the ones we design. But it's out in the world, and people are using it to design these trials. And now I've said too much. Scott, back to you. Brandon,
No,
back to you.
it's wonderful. Lissa's been a huge benefit to the scientific community, medical community for sure.
Well, I'm really glad for people like you because when I was getting my MBA in finance, I had a statistics class in my curriculum. Never taken statistics before, and I'm proud to announce that I got a C. So I'm really
Hey, that's
glad,
great.
Yeah. So I'm glad people like you exist. So I can't do it.
No, we hate it when somebody says, I talk about clinical trial design. I'm helping advise a company, and there's this old geezer, maybe even older than me, who says, I've designed clinical trials for 30 years. I know how to design a trial. Immediately, you know that his head is blocked off. He's not going to listen to anything you say. We don't like people who think they know the answer because they don't. And they don't know what the best way is to do a clinical trial. That's what we deliver to them is, you're going to take this trial, the one Scott mentioned, 200 patients, 4 years. We're going to give you the answer in 6 months, maybe. We don't know. Maybe we have to go longer, but we can give you, in this Aston trial, as I said, it stopped the trial as soon as it was allowed to do so. And it was because it was like artificial intelligence. It was looking across the spectrum of the doses. And it started out looking at the low doses and comparing to placebo, decided that wasn't good enough, and it moved up the chain. It finally started to focus on the highest doses compared to placebo, decided nothing was there, and the good news is for patients that it started to go to placebo. Namely, it wasn't any good. And that thing saved Pfizer millions in terms of the patients, in terms of the patient resources, but also an uncountable, a priceless benefit that it got them off that thing. This was a particular mechanism of action that Pfizer and the rest of the stroke community decided was not the way to go. And so it saved, we really don't know how to quantify it, but it saved, it's almost priceless what the benefit was.
Yeah, it's always hard to quantify time in it. So the story of Brandon, so we started off, so it was Don and me, and we didn't know whether this was going to work. And we were doing a lot of medical device trials. There's been a long history of innovative Bayesian things at the Center for Devices. Greg Campbell was a huge innovator at the FDA for that. And all of a sudden we had people that were interested in looking at adaptive trials, looking at flexible trials. So we added our first full-time employee other than myself. Jason Connor joined several years after that. And we kept getting more and more interest. And as Don described, 2010, it was a little bit, where was drugs going to go? Center for Drugs were doing a lot of devices. And the Center for Drugs became more and more interested. Pharma became more interested. And we have now been steadily growing since 2000 within that setting up to now, as Don described, our 35 scientists here at Berry Consultants, still growing and still innovating.
Yeah, it's such an amazing story. And it's to Don's point, the way that you guys do your trials and the way you run your business, it is so incredibly helpful, not just for the firms that hire you, your clients, and how you can save them money and time and all of that, but also for the patients themselves, and to have the specificity that you have for these trials is really amazing. So how, I guess, following that point, Scott, and we'll take maybe the last 10 minutes or so of this show, how would you describe the current state of Berry? What do you guys, what are maybe projects you're working on, different things that you guys are thinking through and innovating, and then where do you see Berry going over the next year, 5 years, 10 years? Where are you pointing your ship, if I can ask that?
So let me try to address that. There's, back around this 2010, I was designing clinical trials for the Cancer Leukemia Group B in breast cancer. And a friend of mine that I developed a relationship with was Laura Esserman, who's the surgeon at at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. And she was, I was radical, but she was off the deep end, and wanted to do things that similar to what I wanted to do. And we built a trial together. We couldn't do it through the National Cancer Institute, which sponsored these CLGB trials. So we went to the Foundation for the NIH, and we worked with them to fund the trial. This is a public-private partnership with NIH leaders and industry. And so we built a trial called I-SPY 2 that had lots of innovations, had Scott's innovation for using historical controls that he had designed when he wrote an article that won the Journal of the American Statistical Association award for best article that year in applied statistics, that used in baseball, Babe Ruth versus
Mark McGwire.
Mark McGwire, and who was better, adjusting for the time. And so he built this thing that used things in the past. Well, we wanted to use controls. We were randomizing, but we wanted to keep those controls, randomization patients in the trial that we could continue to use as a basis. That was just one of the many innovations. Another innovation, and speaking to your point about patients, was we wanted to treat these women as effectively as possible. So we built in adaptive randomization. So if a drug was doing poorly in a subset of women, it got lower probability of being assigned and soon was zeroed out because there were other drugs that we were looking at. So we ended up over the course of the next 10 years evaluating 23 drugs. 9 of them went on to bigger things.
So Don, let me jump into that part. Since you stole my question, let me steal this from you and take the ball. So imagine how different this is. The historical way this is done is you have a drug A, and you build a whole trial. It's like it would be like the NFL deciding every time they're going to do a game, they build a whole new stadium, they play a game, and they take it down, and then they build a whole nother one. This is what we do. So this I-SPY 2 trial was building a single stadium, a single protocol, and moved 25 drugs through the protocol using the same stadium, comparing them using common controls. If you have 4 trials all enrolling 50% controls and you move them all together and have one arm of control, you've now saved patients, you've saved time. So this was a landmark trial in 2010 in breast cancer. And it's called a platform trial, and it was off the deep end. Fast forward to COVID, the pandemic hits, and we're trying to figure out how to treat COVID, and you can't wait 2 years to build a clinical trial to investigate a single drug, tear it down. So platform trials globally that copied I-SPY 2 were used to treat COVID. Everything we learned how to treat therapeutically COVID came from platform trials that really, the grandfather of that was this crazy idea of I-SPY 2. So what is that? Now we're doing trials of that in ALS, in glioblastoma, in a number of rare diseases, and it was all born out of these crazy ideas of Laura and Don in 2010. So that's where we're going. But we don't know what that innovation is. We have all kinds of ideas of how to make this more efficient, and we have to. It's too expensive. We've got it. There's so many amazing medical therapies out there. To be using 50-year-old trial designs doesn't really work. So we want to be on that cutting edge. We want the next I-SPY, the next thing to do better science in this for patients, for better treatments. we don't know what it's going to be, but we want to be on that sort of cutting edge and doing this better.
So one important footnote to that, in the glioblastoma study, it's a phase 3 trial. That means that if a drug does well in GBM Agile, we call it, we take it to the FDA, and the FDA will approve it. We worked with the FDA really intimately, interacting with them and building the trial that they would okay. And they sent us a letter saying, if you if you have an arm that comes through, a treatment arm that comes through the trial, that graduates and is confirmed within GBM Agile, within this adaptive platform trial, we'll approve it. So, and that was a sea change. I-SPY 2 trial was great. It's known throughout the world as being an innovative trial that people want to imitate. But it's a phase 2 trial. It evaluates these drugs and then moves them, decides which drugs can go into a phase 3 trial. GBM Agile does the phase 3 trial within itself, moving seamlessly from one part of the drug development spectrum, namely, is the drug working, to the confirmatory phase. And this we owe to the FDA, who has just been enormously helpful to us and to, medical research and drug development generally.
I love these stories. I love hearing that something that you designed and brought into the world, 15 years ago is still impacting the world in huge ways, like COVID and some of these other major diseases and issues. It's such an amazing legacy, if you want to call it that.
Just to mention Alzheimer's and just to mention diabetes type 2, and just to mention the new craze, the weight loss craze with the GLP-1 agonists. We designed the first trial for Eli Lilly's dulaglutide, Trulicity, that became their best-selling drug in type 2 diabetes. But
I'm sure they're very happy about that.
We also saw, it's a $5 billion drug, has been, and was the original approved GLP-1 agonist. Mm-hmm. And it showed in the trial we designed a benefit on weight loss that was essentially the same benefit that they eventually saw when they got Trulicity approved for weight loss. And now the rest of the story. The world is getting skinnier all the time, in part because of these GLP-1 agonists.
That's right. The Earth is spinning more quickly on its axis. So if I could summarize all of this, or if you could summarize all of this, what is one thing in 1 minute that you two are very excited about in this coming year, the 25th anniversary, 2025? Barry is going through a lot of change, very exciting things happening. What is one thing that you want listeners to take away from, or one thing that you wish that they knew about Barry in this upcoming year?
Oh, boy. That's a great question. I'm most excited about all of the new statisticians and scientists we have at Barry. They're brilliant. They're coming into this with all new ideas. Their communication is fantastic. So I'm excited to see what they do. It was incredible over these 25 years, but they're much smarter than I am. And so I'm really excited to see what they're going to do with clinical trials.
They're at least B students for sure.
and just one addendum to that. Jason Connor, who Scott mentioned was our first employee, went off on his own partway along. I told Jason that my loyalties are with people. My loyalty is with you. And Jason has his own company, and he consults. He's part of what I call the Berry diaspora, who is spreading the word. I mean, we can't change the world in Austin, Texas. We want to change the world in Peoria, in Australia, in China, in Europe, and we're partway along with that. GBM Agile, for example, is accruing patients in Australia and in Europe, in addition to the United States. So that's the exciting thing, is to change the world, one person at a time.
I love that. Doctors Barry, Don, and Scott, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And I'm very excited about the 25th anniversary this year, about next year, and all the things that you guys are doing. And I'm excited for this show. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I can't wait to have other guests. I know we've got 30-something episodes that we're kind of planning out and working on. So I'm really excited to keep this going. And we'll see you again on episode 2.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Scott.